You know, I woke up in my bed today. It just happens to have happened 100 years ago.
Sounds like a riddle.
It does. I woke up in my bed today, 100 years ago. Who am I?
Frictional Games' 2015 sci-fi horror Soma is a story about people and what it means to be human. Now, it's a pretty tall order to be able to cover a topic as heavy and as philosophically diverse as this at the best of times, but to wrap all of this up into a tightly scripted and tense psychological horror game is quite remarkable. The story puts you in the shoes of Simon, a young man with a terminal neurological condition who agrees to take part in an experimental medical study. After meeting with Dr. Munchie, we discover that the project consists of having a full brain scan at a very precise level and uploading that data to a computer program, which will quickly experiment with a number of potential cures. After finding the best way to treat his condition, the method can then be performed on the real Simon. After taking a seat and having the brain scanner come down over our heads, we see a bright flash and we wake up in a cold, industrial-looking room with Dr. Munchie missing. We come to realise that we're clearly not in the same place as we were a moment ago and attempt to look around and find someone to help. So there's not much else I can really say about this game without spoiling it, and I can't stress this enough, but please play this game for yourself before watching this video. Not only will it be easier to follow if you've already finished it and understand the plot, but the experience as a whole is a lot more impactful when experienced firsthand. So from here on out, there will be spoilers. Let's talk about Soma. So after we explore our newfound surroundings, we come across different documents and computer terminals which state that we're on a research station called Pathos 2 in the far future of 2104. After being rather understandably concerned and confused in the scenario he finds himself in, Simon makes his way through the different sites at the research station to see what he can find. After a little while, he comes to find that Pathos 2 is actually located hundreds of meters below the North Atlantic Ocean. Also, on his journey, he does frequently find himself being hunted by malicious machines and spooky, twisted humanoid creatures. This is where most of Soma's scares come from, trying to access new areas, grab keys and trigger cutscenes whilst trying to run and hide from whatever is currently chasing you in that section. It's not too dissimilar from other horror games that were coming out around the same time, like Outlast and Alien Isolation. In fact, I think the whole thing is quite obviously influenced by, or is at least paying homage to, the Alien franchise, especially the first film. The whole vibe of a scientific research station that's set in the far future but uses large and bulky equipment that wouldn't be out of place in the 70s is quite similar to Ridley Scott's 1979 masterpiece. Another influence that I think Soma wears on its sleeve is that of 2007's BioShock, which not only was also set in a mostly abandoned underwater city, but explored the idea of identity and what makes us human. I've already done a video on that game, so click the card in the top right if you're interested. Anyway, after a little while, Simon explores the facility and hears a voice in the next room over. After going to investigate, he finds that the voice is coming from a machine trapped on the floor, which, despite Simon's best efforts to convince it otherwise, is adamant that it is human. He claims to be a man called Carl and asks you to find help for him, as he's been trapped by falling debris. Simon tries to explain that what he's seeing is a machine with a human voice, but Carl insists that he has a human body with arms and legs and the like. After moving to the next room, we find a dead body on the ground, and after taking a look at the name tag, we discover Carl Semken. This is where Soma officially had me hooked. I wanted to keep playing because I just needed to know what was going on. After reaching the comm station, Simon hears the voice of Catherine, who tells him that he can reach her if he can make it to Lambda, another site at Pathos 2. Soon after, the room floods with water, and Simon watches as his body alters into a form of diving suit, allowing him to breathe and move around on the ocean's floorbed. In the shuttle station, he comes across crew members of the station in barely living conditions, seemingly comatose. It's here that we learn that the station has an artificial intelligence called the WOW, that's Warden unit, which was designed to ensure that human life persevered for as long as possible. As an AI, the WoW clearly doesn't take into account what constitutes a good quality of life, and believes that it's doing its job simply by keeping people alive. Which is why Simon comes across barely conscious bodies who are seemingly plugged into computer terminals around the site. After arriving in Lambda, Simon is rather disappointed to discover that Catherine is also a machine. However, this time it's different. Catherine seems fully aware that she's a robot and doesn't really seem to be concerned by it. It's here that we learn a lot of information about the setting of Soma, and we get a clearer picture of the events that transpired to kick all of this into motion. So if you want to experience this game blind, this will be your last chance to go away and play it before getting it spoiled for you. Catherine explains that some time ago a comet hit the Earth and wiped out the world's population, leaving only the researchers of Pathos 2 alive. The crash resulted in the Earth's atmosphere being uninhabitable, and the underwater station only had enough food and supplies to last the team a few months. Fortunately, Catherine and her team were already working on a project called the Ark. The artificial reality capsule was designed to house virtual versions of the remaining population by uploading scans of their brain and creating an artificial world for them to live in. They were also planning on launching it into space, as it wouldn't last very long underwater since the atmospheric pressure would be too much for the Ark to handle. If it stayed on Pathos 2, they'd likely have a few months to live, where up in space they could potentially live for thousands of years, since upon having your brain scanned and turned into a digital representation, the system would replicate your memories, thought patterns, habits, and entire personality. Catherine is aware that she's no longer a human being, but a digital reconstruction of her uploaded into the body of a machine. She doesn't seem to mind, however, as the transfer is so accurate that she doesn't feel any different to her regular self. Her only concern is that since the scan of her brain took place months prior to current events, she's not sure if her original self, the human version, managed to successfully send the Ark to space. It's here that Simon begins to put the pieces together and discovers how he seemingly travelled 89 years into the future. He is not the Simon that spoke to Dr. Munchie and had his brain scanned. He is the brain scan. His consciousness has been uploaded to an artificial body that appears to be some sort of wetsuit, and now, having worked this out, his brain no longer tries to hide the truth from him. Understandably overwhelmed by the circumstances, Simon freaks out just a little bit. After she manages to calm him down, Catherine discovers that the Ark never did end up getting launched into space, and so the pair decide to travel to Site Tau and finish the mission themselves, hoping to upload their consciousness beforehand and enjoy existing in the proverbial afterlife. Simon removes Catherine's Cortex chip and places it inside of the Omnitool that he's been using to open doors around the station so that the pair can travel together. And this is where most of the game takes place, with Simon and Catherine attempting to reach Tau whilst learning more about what happened at Pathos 2. Soma does a great job at presenting us with the conundrum of what makes us human. After all, we stopped playing as the real Simon as soon as we sat down in that chair. The rest of this time, we've been controlling the scan of him that Munchie took back in 2015. Rather ironically, Simon says to Munchie that Native Americans thought pictures stole a piece of their souls. It's one of those innocuous lines at the time which reflects how nervous Simon is feeling in the moment, but with the context of what comes to pass later on, it's more an example of direct foreshadowing than anything. If you were to ask me, what are we? Then I'd likely answer that we are a collection of memories and experiences. If you were able to go back in time and have a conversation with yourself 10 years ago, whilst you do share the same body, you'd find that you were both very different people. The things that you've experienced in that time, both good and bad, all played their part in making up what you've become. Personally, I think that I hate my 13-year-old self because we are literally that different. So when Soma asks the question, what makes us human, it muddies the water for me a little. Simon, Catherine, Carl, all of these characters have their memories intact, so by my own logic, then they are human beings, right? Well, it's hard to say. Sure, their brain was scanned and uploaded into a machine, but it's worth taking a moment to think about what that actually means. All an AI can do is what it's programmed to do. A computer designed to house the consciousness of a living person can only really do its best to imitate that person. Our personalities are the direct result of chemical reactions in our brains, which obviously a program doesn't have. So while Catherine speaks and acts like a regular human being, it's really just a machine acting in the way that it believes the real Catherine would have, based on what information it has to work off of from the brain scan. Does that make her any less human? Well, that's for us to decide for ourselves, really. You could be of the mindset that a human being has to be made of flesh and bone, so a computer couldn't possibly replicate that biological definition. But from that more literal point of view, then we should still be human when we die, right? Would you classify a skeleton as a human being? If you were to argue that the characters in Soma aren't human, then you'd have to realize then that's also the case when you talk to somebody on the phone. Your phone isn't literally alive and speaking to you, it's simply an electronic device doing its best to replicate what the person on the other end of the line sounds like. I'm not a human either, just an AI construct recorded through a camera, uploaded to my computer, put through an editing software, uploaded to YouTube, and is now coming to you through the power of the internet. The whole concept of transhumanism is really interesting, and a conversation you can have with your friends for hours, because, like with most philosophical debates, there is no right answer, only what we believe in ourselves and how we choose to perceive this crazy world that we're in. If you're interested in this kind of thing and you'd like to read more stories that tackle similar themes, then I'd suggest Peter Watts' Blind Sight and Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Back to Soma. We eventually discover that the site Tau is located very deep under the ocean, like another 3,000 meters deep. We're told that the water pressure is too strong for us to go down on our own, and so we have to acquire a tougher, bulkier diving suit. We end up finding one, however we can't fit inside as we're already in a suit. Catherine mentions that we can scan Simon's consciousness into the new diving suit, giving him a new body. Whilst apprehensive at first, he eventually agrees and goes through with the transfer. After opening his eyes to find himself in his new body, Simon hears his voice coming from another room.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something? Catherine?
Simon is horrified to discover that he still exists in his previous body as a separate entity. Catherine explains that it's impossible to transfer a consciousness in a cut-and-paste type way. You can't move, you can only copy. It's explained as a coin toss. After performing the transfer, there were always going to be two Simons, but it was a 50-50 chance of whether we'd wake up in the new body or stay in the old one as the new version of us walks away. The old Simon has fallen asleep due to a power deficiency, and Catherine tells us that if we're that upset about it, then we can hit the button on screen and delete the contents of his Cortex chip. You can walk away and leave this version of Simon to wake up in a few days confused and alone, or you can press delete and essentially euthanize him. The decision doesn't have any consequences later on, but I think what you choose says a lot about how you feel about the question at hand. Would it really be a mercy killing if he's not even alive to begin with? Catherine tells Simon that both himself and the version we left behind would both argue that they are the real Simon. Neither version is lesser, we just happen to be controlling one of them. During one particular section of the game, we need a cipher in order to progress to the next part of the station, and so Catherine suggests plugging in a Cortex chip that we found earlier. Booting it up on a nearby terminal reveals the consciousness of a crew member named Brandon. Catherine hopes that we can talk to Brandon and have him reveal the code to us. However, it doesn't exactly go to plan. His consciousness places him right after having his brain scanned, and so when he finds himself in a dark void talking to us as disembodied voices, he quickly deduces that he's in a simulation. His panic causes the system to overload and kill the program as a failsafe. So from here on out, we have to make Brandon as comfortable as possible to make sure that the conversation will last long enough to get the information we need. It's a little messed up when you think about it, but we have the freedom to literally pull this man in and out of existence as many times as we need in order to benefit ourselves. After installing a level which resembles the testing room and having Catherine take control of an avatar in the form of Brandon's love interest Alice, we're able to trick him into thinking that he still exists in the real world as a human, and he gives us the code that we need. This section comes into play later as it reveals just how manipulative Catherine can be when she wants to. Towards the game's climax, we've reached the Ark and have prepared to send it into space, when Simon asks Catherine if they should upload their consciousness before they launch. She tells him that she wants to make sure that the launch is successful before the upload, and so she's assigned both actions to one button. After we take a seat in the command chair and hit the button, the rocket fires off and the screen fades to white. When it fades back in, Simon is appalled to wake up in the same chair with the Ark long gone into space. When Catherine wakes, Simon confronts her and demands an explanation. Again, she tells him that one's consciousness cannot be moved, only copied, and that this time they both lost the coin toss. He demands to know why he didn't make it after everything he's been through, to which she tells him that they did make it, both of them. They were both uploaded to the Ark before it left, but there was always going to be a copy of them left behind. She argues that it was all about the mission and that he should think about the countless lives that now get to live on in paradise thanks to what they did. However, during their argument, Catherine's stress levels reach critical and she malfunctions, leaving Simon 2 miles below the sea, completely alone. So that's a real gut punch of an ending. However, after the credits finish rolling, there is one last thing for us to see. After a fade in, we come to see that Simon wakes up in a woodland area. It's all very quaint and peaceful. After a short walk, Simon finally meets Catherine in her human form. The two embrace, and finally we get a shot of the Ark floating around in space. I think what's interesting about Soma and the way it develops its characters is that they're not what we typically categorize as good people. As we've sort of touched on already, Catherine is rather manipulative when she deems it necessary, and is perfectly willing to tell half-truths or keep things to herself entirely. She knows that Simon is honestly quite a selfish person, and will continue to allow him to believe things that may not necessarily be true to further her own agenda. She knew that he wouldn't have gone to all the effort if he knew he wasn't going to be able to get on the Ark. An important detail from the game is that Catherine can only communicate with Simon when the Omnitool is plugged into a console of some sort, so when he's running around doing errands, she technically doesn't exist. So despite Simon having the longest day of his life from waking up in bed to firing that rocket, for Catherine, it was more like a half-hour conversation. She didn't really know this man or what he was capable of, she simply saw an opportunity and took it. Simon's biggest flaw was his naivety and his seeming determination to not learn from his experiences. Remember, Simon learns that he's an AI construct when he meets Catherine relatively early on in the game. By the time you reach the Ark, you're playing as the 4th version of Simon at that point. You stopped playing as Simon 1, the real Simon, when you sat in that chair in the prologue. Simon 2 lasts until you switch bodies in Omicron, Simon 3 is the version that gets left behind, and Simon 4 makes it to the Ark. They're all the same person, yet different entities. Despite Catherine explaining to him earlier that you can't transfer, you can only copy, Simon remained ignorant of this to the very end. Simon 3 hadn't considered it a possibility that he would be left behind, just as Simon 4, despite making it to the Ark, remained ignorant of the other versions of him that were sacrificed to make it here. Simon knew that severe stress could cause a Cortex chip to blow, but that didn't stop him from berating Catherine, which was inevitably responsible for her malfunction. As I said at the beginning of the video, Soma is a story about people and what it means to be human. However, what I think makes this game so clever is that you will have a different perspective by the time it's over. Going into the game, I had my preconceptions. We are our thoughts and collective experiences. However, I think the game comes at this from a much more pessimistic angle. Despite creating such a profound and altruistic project, human beings are seemingly incapable of seeing past their own existence. Relatively early on in the game, you come across a computer terminal with a survey asking how you feel about the ARC project. Questions like, how do you perceive your new existence? On my playthrough, I answered like a new chapter in my life, because, well, it is. The surroundings of Pathos 2 was so far removed from 2015 Toronto that it was like walking into a new chapter of life. When Simon finally reaches the Ark, you find yourself face to face with a terminal housing that very same survey. And despite the questions being exactly the same, the mixed emotions of what we've been through completely recontextualized my answers. This time I picked it's a direct continuation of my previous self, because it feels like you've earned your place here. Like I've said already, Simon is just as ignorant to the sacrifices of his other selves as he is to Catherine's complete manipulation of him throughout the whole thing. She believed she was using him to finish her project, and he believed he was using her to make his existence somewhat bearable. I don't think that there's a better embodiment of the notion, ignorance is bliss. The game opens with a quote from Philip K. Dick. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, doesn't go away. Simon and Catherine tend to forget about each other when they're not directly conversing, just as we can turn off the news and pretend that horrible things aren't happening in the world. They were both so caught up in their own agendas that they didn't really stop to consider how human is the person next to me.